This is the 12th episode of Considering Charlotte that I've gotten to host on PlainSpoken. I've been really glad to do it. I did not do all the research that I had hoped I would along the way, but I've still learned so much from the different people who've been a part of this. This, like I said, is going to be the 12th episode, and it's going to be the final one before General Conference begins. Things are really getting in motion now, and for that reason, I noticed that a lot more views are happening on the Considering Charlotte videos that we put out, and that pleases me. So if this is your first one that you're watching, just understand that we've done a number of topical ones in the past where we've looked at regionalization and changing of the language around sexuality and the new social principles. We've looked at things from a lot of different angles. I lean right, and I try to represent that perspective a little bit, but the people who've been a part of this panel, some lean left, some lean right, some are not even on that continuum, but represent other viewpoints as well. So it's really been a good discussion. I just think it's been a really worthy way to spend our time. So I'm excited to see what I'm going to learn from my brothers today. We've got Joe DiPaolo, Lonnie Brooks, Odell Horn, Simon Mafunda, each representing different constituencies and worldviews. And I'm just so pleased to be with you guys today. So the things that I know of that have happened this last week, I got kind of embroiled in the Dakota's annual conference put out a Q&A that they're claiming has been falsified, and people are very upset about this, and I'm not quite sure why. The thing that I'm more upset about is the Africa Initiative statement that came out, and it just seems like even though Africans speak very clearly, it falls on deaf ears, and so that's what I'm anxious about right now. But the bishops are meeting right now, and they've made a number of statements that I know we're going to talk about, and then there's some movement on some of the 5 R's that Mainstream UMC has put out. So we'll see what we cover in this time, but I knew probably the most important thing to cover, and the thing we're going to start with is a report from Simon Mafunda representing. Of course, there's no way he can represent everybody in the African UMC, but he's very plugged into what the different delegations from Africa are dealing with. So, Simon, what would you think is important for everybody to know right now?
Thank you, Jeffrey. I missed the other session, but I'm back at least for this session before I travel to Charlotte. But I think what's important for our listeners to know is that the Africa Initiative group met in Nairobi for almost a week, focusing mainly on the upcoming General Conference and the legislation pieces that are before General Conference. And the combination of delegates attending this meeting were on the right side. I mean, those are the conservatives, very strong conservative delegates from Africa. And generally, those delegates saying no to the 3R issue that is being raised. We are opposing that. And you may want to know that out of the 150 people attending, the supermajority were delegates to General Conference, and of course, other key leaders of Africa Initiative. And we could not bring more. We could have brought even more, but we had budget constraints. Even the space that we're using, we could not carry what we had. So we had quite a number of our delegates who could not make it because of our budget constraints. They had to be represented by other delegates, especially where we South Congo. We could only take 20 out of the 54 delegates of South Congo. They wanted to bring everyone, but we could not carry them all. So I believe we had a very good representation of the continent of Africa from all episcopal areas. They were represented. But we may have others who may not be fully supporting what we reported on. I can say there may be 1 or 2 who may be slightly different. I don't know. But you could see by the voting and the support, it was almost always unanimous on those issues. So number one, we discussed at length the regionalization plan, the different versions of regionalization that are before General Conference. We had to single out all those petitions that has anything to do with regionalization. And generally, we are opposing regionalization. because of its fragmentation effect. We feel we're giving more power to America, and you are fragmenting Africa, rendering it even less cohesive and less powerful in terms of what we are supposed to do. Those are the questions that people are raising, that why is America one big block of a region with all those states, and Africa, which is even, which is even bigger in terms of membership. The proposal is to divide it into pieces. It weakens us. It it fragments us, and we don't see ministry going well in such a setup. I think all the reasons have been forwarded, have been given, but overall, we are opposing regionalization. And number two, Africa Initiative and its allies and all the members who attended Nairobi meeting, and those who could not, and even ordinary Pew members who are now getting some of these messages and at least sending their WhatsApp messages to the delegates. They are also opposing the new social principles. I think we've already picked on some of the challenges that the social principles, unless we had all the time to read every line and compare to the old thing, it's not the normal thing where we have the cross through and the underline, so that you immediately pick what is being changed and you process it and see whether it really meets what we have. It's a whole new document that you really have to be a genius to be able to understand, to know thoroughly the old version, and then to also know the new version to be able to support it, or to, but because of those things that distort it, we find it difficult to accept the new social principles. And we have, according to us, we have a dicey kind of situation where part of Africa, represented by the United Methodist Africa Forum, is saying, no, we'll support social principles, but we'll offer an amendment to one or two areas, especially the change of language of the definition of marriage. And our argument is, but no, look here. Our Western Bloc, they are for this. They want to support this. This is the language that they want to change in order to support whatever the practice they want to put in. And we can see some kind of challenges are there. But overall, we're saying we oppose the new social principles. I cannot go into all the details of why. I think we've been arguing about how we feel about the new social principles. And in number three, we still stand by the Book of Discipline of 2016 plus 2019, which means whatever we amended in 2016 and 2019 is what we are propagating for, is what we are supporting, which means the removal of the so-said harmful language. We don't think it's harmful according to our interpretation, our understanding of the Bible. We then want to go even into the Bible and remove the same harmful language if people believe it's harmful, something that Africans don't see or understand it that way. So we stand, maybe to be simpler, we stand by the Book of Discipline of 2016 plus 2019 with the language that is in there. And we then discuss the disaffiliation issues. And we feel that we need fairness and justice. And as our delegates go to General Conference, they are not voting to disaffiliate, but they are voting to put in place a provision that allows other parts of the denomination to be able to go through the discernment process and decide their future. This is what we are talking about. I think there is some distortion. Our counterparts, or those who are fighting us, are saying, oh no, they are voting to disaffiliate. That's not the point. We are voting to put in place some exit paths, some fairness and some justice, so that those who want to consider or have time to discern and think of their future and decide, they should be given that opportunity and enough time to decide. And if they want to stay, they will still stay. This is why Americans, only 7,000 left, and the 20,000 they stayed behind. So why don't we give the same opportunity to the other blocks of the denomination? This is our argument as Africa Initiative, and is well spelled out in the press statement or our position statement of where we are and what we are coming for at the General Conference. Then obviously we also registered our concerns about how we are being treated as Africans. I think we've said that over and over again, and we are not happy. We are coming there like in a panic. Let me touch, maybe if you allow me, let me also give you an update on the visas issues and the air tickets issues, because those things are
Simon,
affecting our
let's
delegates.
take a breather for
I
just a minute, if we could, because you've
Okay.
covered a lot of content, and I want to make sure that we change up the pace for our viewers a little bit, and that we digest what you've said. And then I do want to come back and hear you talk about the visas. So we have three other guys here, still in the
Thank you.
United Methodist Church, still concerned about this stuff. Do you have questions about the Africa Initiative gathering or the positions that Simon has represented here?
Yes, I do, Simon. Last month, I had an article published in Firebrand magazine called, my goodness, I'm getting old. The Scramble for Africa in the United Methodist Church.
Scramble for Africa.
And one of the things that I talked about was the divide and conquer techniques in how the United Methodist Church is operating in Africa, and that these opposition groups to Africa Initiative, the United Methodist Africa Forum and Africa Voices in Unity, did not arise until after the pandemic. Excuse me, let me be more specific, during the pandemic, but after the special session of the General Conference. What is the push-pull, the struggle between these groups and the relationship with Africa Initiative?
A good question, Odell. To be very specific, Africa, United Methodist Africa Forum was only formed last year. It's hardly a year old. And the other one, United Methodist Voice of Unity, is slightly older, I think a couple of years, like 3 years or so. And because of personalities, between the key leaders, they then had a fallout, and the other team then formed this Africa unit of, Africa, Africa, the UMAF, whatever, this latest one. So the Voices of Unity, you find it mainly in Nigeria. I don't seem to see many members outside of Nigeria. And their leader there, the key leader is Andy Emmanuel, is the key leader of the Africa Voice of Unity. And Lloyd Narota, a Zimbabwean, has been elected or selected as the general coordinator. They have almost the same structure like Africa Initiative. He is now the general coordinator for the Africa Voice of, Africa, this new one, I just call it UMAF, that new caucus. But our argument or our understanding, these groups are trying to counter what Africa Initiative is doing. And they have got some people behind them that know that without Africa, like you rightly said in your article, the Scramble for Africa, they need voices to support regionalization. They need voices to support the liberal trajectory or the institutional kind of thinking within the liberal setup or the liberal school of thought. They cannot pass some of these things without the African vote. So they had to find means to get to Africans. And number two, if you check closely within, especially the UMAF group, there are people who are also vying for leadership positions in terms of the Episcopal office. And they are taking a ride on, advertising the unity for Africa, because they know that's the mandate for the bishops. They know that's the rhetoric for the bishops. So they want to tell people what the bishops want to hear, what the people want to hear, in order for them to get support to be elected into office, because we've got a couple of openings in bishops for bishops in Africa, those who are retiring, and hopefully I don't know how many we may get on the new bishops for Africa. I think there's a recommendation for 2 or so. So it's a combination of those the political issues that are happening. But the divide and the rule issue is right there. Whereas Africa Initiative has been there to support, to empower delegates from Africa. That has been its main purpose, and to empower them to make them more useful on the general conference floor. And it has paid dividends. You can see the results. You can feel that Africa Initiative is a power to reckon with, because we have been empowered indeed to stand and argue our way and show the world that we would want the church to go this direction. So I see these other two groups being used to divide the power of the Africans in order to push and propagate for the more liberal thinking and, to give more power in terms of supporting regionalization in legislation that is more liberal or kind of institutional and all related to the trajectory that we seem to see now. So it has indeed been a divide and rule kind of approach. And of course, they've weakened the voting power of the Africans so far, but we then come and converge on one or two things, because they also seem to say, no, we still maintain that homosexuality is incompatible, blah, 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 and we want to offer an amendment. But we then differ on everything else. How genuine they are, that's another question. I always argue that this is just a political maneuver. We have always known what they want to achieve. But at least what they write and what they tell people is, we are going to offer an amendment to that. But everything else then differs. But your article was spot on. I really support your thinking and your observation about what is happening in Africa. Thank you.
I wrote Jerry Kula privately because my concern has been, depending on where one stands and who one listens to, it's easy to caricature one side or the other. I listened to people on the left who, I think it was just last week, one person in the comments said, well, speaking of people who are trying to run for bishop, Forbes Matanga supposedly is passed around literature trying to become a bishop of the Global Methodist Church. And so whenever those kinds of accusations are thrown around about people on the African delegation to people on the left, then it sure sounds different from whenever what I would focus on is Ande Emmanuel, the head of Voices of Unity, has a Facebook page promoting himself as a bishop already. And he, whenever Cedric Bridgeforth, openly gay man, was elected bishop, he was publicly congratulating him on Facebook, which belies any kind of loyalty to the African position on sexual ethics. So I look at that and I feel very plainly, but there are people on the left in America who would look at Forbes Matanga and go, well, that seems quite disingenuous as well, and it seems like Africa Initiative is trying to take everybody over to the GMC. These are things that I've heard people say, and to my mind, the only thing that really matters is names and numbers. So in the Tanzania gathering with UMAF, they said that they had a majority of the African delegates there, but they had no list of names to publish. They just had numbers that they generated. So unfortunately, that's exactly how Africa Initiative chose to report on their gathering last week. There are not names associated with it. It's just numbers. So unless Africa Initiative actually publishes the names of the people associated with their gathering, then the only way that people are going to know the truth of where Africa stands is looking at the votes next week and the week afterwards, which is kind of unfortunate because until that point, you're going to have well-intentioned, well-meaning people in America saying, well, obviously, Ande Emmanuel and Lloyd Nyarota represent the majority African opinion, and it's their word against Simon Mafunda and Jerry Kula. And that's just an unfortunate place to be in. I don't think it had to be that way. I think that it was possible, it still is possible, for people to publish the lists of people who are actually with them. But maybe there's some part of that equation that I haven't fully appreciated, and maybe that was a fictitious thing to hope for. So Simon, respond to that and then get into the visa conversation and what's going on with the delegations there.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I think your comment is quite fair. It was unfortunate. Let me start by the names issue. It was unfortunate that the plan we had was to have every name, every person sign against their name, then publish everything together. But we had a glitch in trying to do that because our general coordinator had then to travel immediately. Actually, he left much earlier from the meeting to travel to America. And we then had to coordinate that together. So the names then came after, and we had to also, it was a time-sensitive issue. We needed this statement out before delegates started traveling. But indeed, the names are there, we have them. And if anyone wants them, we are free to publish them. Actually, I spoke to Jerry and concurred that we needed them out. He needs to attach them and send another copy for people to see. There's nothing to hide about that. And all the people agreed that they want their names shown. The world must know that we said this, and we have put our signatures and our names against that. And even our phone numbers, if they want to talk to us, there's nothing to hide. So that information is available, and I'm sure Brother Jerry is going to publish that. We all agreed unanimously that we are going to support what we have said, and there's no secret about that. Then number two, the political shenanigans about certain leaders being accused of wanting to take the church to GMC. It just explains what I've just told you about those vying for positions to be elected as bishops. They know people like Forbes Matonga. He's an outspoken person, a very strong traditionalist. He says his mind. And those who, the weaker characters who think that they may not stand with him in the ring, they start to do the kind of smear campaign. They do campaigning by accusing him that he's going to take the church to GMC. And this is the rhetoric in Africa. It's like a crime to go to GMC. It's like they worship Satan in GMC. So they use that so that at least everyone will not vote for him and vote for them. This is how cheap the politics can be. But some of these guys are just standing for what they believe. Jerry is standing for what he believes. Forbes Matonga is standing for what he believes Africa should do. And being elected a bishop or not is another issue for another day. But you've got a bigger thing that we are facing now to say, these are the pieces of legislation we need to fight against. But you can see that where does GMC come in when you are talking about regionalization, we are talking about change of language. These are UMC issues that we are facing, nothing to do with the GMC. So those are political shenanigans just to pull down Forbes Matonga because he aspires to be a bishop. People like Jerry is not even aspiring to be a bishop. Many other leaders here, I'm not aspiring to be a bishop, I'm a lay person. But we are standing for what we believe is right. And we are standing for millions of voices in Africa who think that we mustn't take the church in this trajectory that we are seeing. We need to try and push it this way. This is our argument. And we feel we demand fairness and we need to be treated fairly as equal members of the denomination. These are the serious issues that we are facing. So I take that as cheap politics, and I do want to spend much of my time on GMC, this and that. So let me talk about
Can I ask a question?
visa issues.
Can I ask a question first? It seems to me that there's obviously differences between the forum and the initiative, certainly on regionalization and apparently on some of the language issues as well. But where they seem to be in agreement is that they feel they have been abused and not properly treated by the General Commission and by the leaders of the church. So I would think that that's something where has there been any response, any communication from any bishops or other denominational leaders in response to what appears to me to be unanimous protests about how this process has unfolded for African delegates to participate in General Conference?
Sorry, Joe, you are breaking a little bit, but however, we have not heard any response from anyone about this issue. You are right that, UMAF, Voice of Unity, Africa Initiative, we have all echoed the same complaints and concerns about our treatment in terms of the preparation to the General Conference. But we have not had any response. Only yesterday evening, I saw I think a press release or a position statement by the Commission. They are trying to explain, to give an update now, the details of how many visas have been issued, blah, blah, what they've done, the challenges they faced. Although I was going to comment on that as I give you some of the figures I have here. We don't seem to agree on their figures, and we still to see the final figures when we get to Charlotte. But we have not had any response from the officials of the General Conference, and no response from any of our bishops in the UMC. They have gone mum about the issue. So that's where we are. No one has responded. no one has even sympathized with us as our bishops to say, this is true.
Wow.
This is happening. They have not said anything. If they did, maybe as they meet in the council, they probably under closed doors, I don't know. But publicly, we haven't heard anything from our bishops in terms of what we are going through as delegates. Our delegates are going through. So if you allow me, let me just give a quick update on the visa issue. I have gone through that report, and we seem to differ on a number of issues. They seem to claim that, almost like the supermajority of the visas have been issued, and they've got like a 73% of delegates from central conferences will be able to attend. But we are still to refine those numbers and concur with what we have. We seem to be differing a little bit. But the visas issues, quite big numbers of our delegates could not get visas. Let me start with Nigeria. Nigeria, there was chaos. I think I have highlighted this before. And at the end of the day, out of their 22 delegates, only 7 delegates are able to travel to Charlotte out of 22, because the majority could not get visas. The invitation letters came very late, and then General Conference made an effort, put an effort to fly them to Liberia for their visa appointments there. There was confusion. Some people missed their flights because sometimes they would get their ticket like today, they must fly out tomorrow, things like that. And at the end of the day, we have 7 still to be updated. But as of the last few days, only 7 delegates had tickets and visas to travel to Charlotte. Then the latest update I have from Cote d'Ivoire, out of the 32 delegates, they have 17. 17 are able to travel to Charlotte out of 32 delegates. They have two more that have their interviews on the 25th of April. General Conference will have started already. That's when they have their interviews. So by the time they get their passports, get tickets organized, I think by the time they get to Charlotte, General Conference will be halfway through or almost done. So we just keeping our fingers crossed for those 2. But summarily, we have 17 out of 32. Then South Congo, the last update I had, only 22 out of 54 were able to travel as of the last 2 days. They were still, running up and down, trying to have some more tickets organized for a few more delegates. But if we get more than 30 delegates from South Congo out of the 54, we'll be very lucky, because quite a number of them could not get visas. Then in North Katanga, I don't have a clear update, but the last figure I got was like 54 out of 66. So it's like about 12 delegates could not get visas, but we need a confirmation of that. Then we have got other smaller conferences where we have like 4 delegates, 6, 8. We have, a few more that are missing. And our initial number was adding up to about 61 delegates who will be missing from Africa. And that's unprecedented. That's a big number, not to attend from one region. That's a big number. I don't have figures from Philippines and other areas. I'm talking about Africa. Then on the tickets issue, that has been even worse. People have been phoning until the very last minute to get some of the tickets. I'll give you an example for a Zambian friend. He got a ticket like in the evening, which was like in the morning in America when it was sent. But he got here in the evening, because we got 7-8 hour difference. And his departure was the following morning about 8:30. This guy, his international airport departure is Lusaka, but he stays in the Copper Belt. So he needed to get a bus and drive like 7-8 hours to get to the airport. So he had to travel all the night to get to the airport to be able to leave the following morning. I don't think that is fair. And many delegates have been affected in the same manner. You get your ticket today, you're supposed to travel tomorrow morning. I don't know whether they assume that we all stay like around the airport. Some of our delegates stay out there in the rural areas. They've got to get 2-3 buses to get to the big city. There are no flights from some of our rural areas in some of our countries. You have to get public transport, to get you to the big city where you get your flight out of your port of departure. So all those things were really overlooked. We needed good time to get our tickets so that we get organized and, in terms of our transport. So everyone is now traveling in a panic mode. And the moment they land there, orientation begins immediately. So we really believe this was not fair, was not called for, was not necessary. And we feel our delegates have been treated like second-class members of the denomination. And I don't know what message we are going to give when our delegates meet together in Charlotte, but I think we've lost the trust of the business team of the General Conference. We have lost our confidence with them. We have lost trust. And we suspect that this has not been in good faith because we had all the time to prepare a good 2 years. We knew that Charlotte was going to happen in 2 years when it was last postponed. I believe we had enough time to prepare. We could have done better than this. We understand, yes, there are some complications here and there, but this is a bit too much. And that's where we are so far. So we will get the exact numbers when we get on the ground and then compare with their bulletin that we got today. But we already differ on the numbers because we've got big numbers missing from Africa as people gather in Charlotte now. Some will get there when General Conference already started, they will miss orientation. They will be just in a panic mode and, panting for breath, and they have to do business at the same time and do all the necessary adjustment in terms of diet, in terms of jet lag. They're going to deal with a lot of things and still expected to do serious business like everyone else. I think that has been very unfair. Let me end there for now. That's a quick update from Africa.
Yeah, Simon, I want to thank you for that, Simon. You poured a lot of energy into making that as concise as possible. Something that Lonnie has talked about, Amy, when she was with us, is having something akin to a constitutional convention in 2026. The UMAF statement that we read together last week called on the General Conference to go ahead and resolve in meeting somewhere in Africa next time. I wonder how realistic it would be for the entire African delegation, whether it's affiliated with the UMAF, Voices of Unity, Africa Initiative, or just independent, not affiliated. I wonder what the odds are that all of you could put out a unanimous statement at the beginning of General Conference saying our delegation is not big enough. We cannot adopt anything right now. We call on the General Conference to adjourn and meet in 2026 in Africa, where we will have right delegation and rightly entertain these options. Do you think there's any hope at all that Africans could speak with one voice against making big decisions next week, or do you think it's a foregone conclusion and you're just going to have to do your best?
That's a very pertinent question, Jeff. I think there is a possibility that African can speak with one voice because we are not fully represented. Doesn't matter you are coming from UMAF, you are coming from Voice of Unity, you are coming from Africa Initiative. We are not fully and properly represented as Africans. And it gives us that concern. And it's something that we even talked about when we met in Kenya. But we were not sure how our brothers and sisters felt because some argued that if they are fronting for other people, they could be happy that we got much less Africans and our votes are easy to pass without being blocked by the Africans. So let's move on. Some people may think that way. But our friends, when we meet in Kenya last week, we had that discussion. And I want to tell you that there's a possibility that when all the Africans meet, they are going to talk seriously about that. And I think there was some inferences even in that open letter that Lloyd Nyarota did, that we even challenge the outcome of this General Conference, its credibility, when such a big number of Africans and other Central Conference members are missing. Then we question the credibility of that General Conference. So it's not out of the question the possibility of Africans saying, no, guys, this is not right. Either we can think the way Lonnie thinks, that let's just do the basic stuff that gets us going, but the bigger things, let's defer them until some other time. I think there's a very high probability that it can happen that way. people have those ideas, and when they converge, I think they can build on it and come up with a position.
I've had 2 prompts for Simon. Odell's had a question. Joe's had a question. Lonnie, is there any follow-up you'd like with Simon before we move on?
He's singing my song. I love it. Thanks.
Odell, Joe, any other stuff to be said about or things to ask about Africa before we move on?
Sure. I just one a minor thing. I think I read in the past the commission, the General Commission on the General Conference, saying that one of their problems was that because of the time lapse, there had been lots of changes in the delegations, and they were not able to keep up with the changing cast of delegates. Is that true? Have there been a lot of changes in the last couple of years? To what extent is that true?
I disagree with that.
Okay.
We didn't have those big changes in Africa. That's why we never had even any new elections in Africa. The only changes that we may have had are people who may have passed on, or people who changed their geographical location that they felt it's unfair to keep the position being delegates. And they were automatically replaced by their alternates. In our contingents of delegates, we had a good number of reserves that automatically, fill the place of those who have shifted. So I don't know what changes they are talking about. The only changes that I am aware of that we have been complaining about are the dubious one where the leaders, some senior leaders have tried to change bona fide delegates and put in their own friends or something like that. We have 3-4 cases that we raised, and we are still following up. We have cases in South Africa, we have cases in Congo, where the elected delegates have been replaced by those who were not even elected. So we're going to follow up those and raise those issues, because those delegates will be illegal. They should not sit in the General Conference. They will be illegal. And we don't want to have cases like what we had in 2019 in St. Louis. We don't want a repeat of that. But in terms of general changes, they are not that numerous. I disagree.
Then I find it, I think people know, I may have said this in a previous episode, I don't recall, but as people know, I was on the Commission on General Conference until 2 years ago when I resigned in protest over the postponement. And at that time, the initial impetus was the COVID continuance of COVID, but that had faded by the time we had our meeting to make the decision. The main reason cited at that time was that there wasn't time to get the letters out of invitation and visa interviews to get African delegates here. And so they had to know that was a key consideration to keep track of in the last 2 years. It's inconceivable to me how that could have simply been forgotten or overlooked. So, there's only 2 explanations. One is they goofed, they dropped the ball, incompetence, or the other intentional. And I can't prove it, but it's hard not to go there because they knew this was the key issue. I do not comprehend why this occurred.
I don't know. I don't know what it would take. I don't know what it would take to convince us that it's not intentional. This is strongly how we feel. This is what we see. It's intentional. And what was the coincidence that some of the areas where our most vocal people come from, they had the most hard hit, by this visas issue and these delays. It's really it's very suspicious. It's very suspicious.
Lonnie, go ahead.
Singling Africa out for critique based on changes in delegations is really prejudicial. Look at the Great Plains Conference. They had 4 of their delegates who were not able to go to this general conference. So they've put in 3 of their reserve delegates who've now become delegates. And one of those, by the way, is Mark Holland. He was a reserve delegate, according to the election for 2016, but he's now become a delegate by virtue of replacing another delegate who couldn't be there. One of whom is Cheryl Jefferson Bell, a very prominent member of Great Plains, on staff at Church of the Resurrection. And they're now listed at the Great Plains, 1 delegate short with a whole list of reserves. So that's a mystery also. Singling Africa out for this kind of critique is just totally prejudicial.
Odell.
Thank you, Simon, for that report. I don't know where to begin other than to make sure that liberals and progressives understand that the list of delegates was first published in Volume 1 of the ADCA, the Advanced Daily Christian Advocate, in January 2020. And the new list of delegates was published in this month, April 2024, in Volume 3 of the supplemental.
Revised Volume 3.
The revised, right. I started with Burundi, looking specifically at the central conferences in Africa, or the annual conferences in Africa. I got from Burundi to North Katanga, and the list in Volume 1 and the list in Volume 3 are almost identical. Now, I am not done with going through the list because I only got to North Katanga. But if there are delegates that they couldn't keep up with at the Commission on General Conference, and I have not heard anyone at the Commission of General Conference make that statement that there were changes. So I don't know where that came from. But if you're looking at Volume 1 and Volume 3 of the ADCA, I don't know how you can make a statement like that.
Yeah.
Well, we've spent a good deal of time on this, and it's worthy. It's perhaps the most worthy area to analyze around this. But I do know we had hoped to look at a couple more things while we were together. So we'll talk once we turn the recording off about how it is that we can follow up on these particular topics around disenfranchisement of African voices, and see if maybe there's anything else that we can do in the next week or two. Because I'd hate to just virtue signal towards it and then go, well, shucks, on to the next topic. So this is perhaps the most important thing. Let's talk about the Bishops' Gathering. I've watched a couple little clips, but I'm out now, so I lack the interest and the energy for it. Lonnie, we've heard your voice the least. Perhaps you'd be willing to tell us what you've noticed about the Bishops' Gathering and what other people should notice.
Well, I haven't spent a whole lot of time attempting to follow it, but I did carefully follow the opening address from Bishop Tom Bickerton, because that was covered by United Methodist News Service fairly prominently. And whereas I didn't have any disagreement with the content of what Bishop Bickerton had to say, I'm pretty much on the same page that he is on the issues, although I do have some differences on the regionalization proposal. As you know, I've supported and do still support regionalization as long as it gets amended to address the problems that Simon and others, particularly from Africa, have identified, which is the failure to regionalize in North America, which would leave North America as a big block, and the failure of it to regionalize the episcopacy, which is critical to any kind of sense of regionalization at all, in my judgment. So I differ with him a little bit on that, but regionalization as an overall concept I support. And I support the same position that he supports on removing the harmful language. I think we're going to talk about that a little more later. But I was really disturbed by the tone that, and this is a thing that Joe emphasized a lot in our conversation last week. What we see of the tone of General Conference is going to be really important. And as measured by what Bishop Bickerton had to say, the tone isn't going to be very productive of good relations between remaining traditionalists and centrists and extreme progressives. And I think he's put himself pretty solidly in the extreme progressive camp here. I mean, he was bordering, if not over the border, in what Joe has previously said also about I'm right and you're evil, not I'm right and you're wrong. And so if you don't agree with him on the way the episcopacy ought to go forward, then you're anti-bishop. And if you don't agree with him on how the agency should be structured and function, well, then you're anti-agency. And that's just not right, in my judgment. We should be able to to disagree on those kinds of points that don't go to the heart of the mission of what it is to be a church, and therefore ought, using the Wesleyan concept of how to go forward, in fully embracing one another heart to heart. So I was disturbed by that address.
I was on, I've said a couple of times I'm on some WhatsApp groups that are primarily run by Africans, and the Africans noted when Bishop Carter made a statement 2 days ago saying that he's in favor of removing language around sexual ethics as well. And so they just kind of noticed the mask is finally off. The bishops are now finally overtly saying that they stand against the Book of Discipline. And it's just a sign of the times. So would I be right in interpreting, Lonnie, your words that the bishops' gathering, so far from what you've seen, seems to kind of have a triumphalist attitude where they're pretty confident that things are finally going to change, or did I infer incorrectly that?
No, I think you've read it exactly correctly, and this, of course, is what I forecast, that the progressives would be in a triumphal mode going into this general conference, and maybe marching all the way through it. That's my fear.
Lonnie, Lonnie, you were talking. Odell, Joe, anything else to say about the bishops' gathering before we go on to the attempts to change the language? Okay. Well, Odell, I knew that you in particular. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, brother.
I do. Two things. I just can't. I'm looking at a United Methodist News Service article that is dated April 27, 2004. The title of the article is United Methodist Bishops Charge Racism in Visa Denials. And Bishop James King, who's now retired, Bishop Marshall or Jack Maters, who my understanding has recently passed away. Several Bishop Ernest Light is here. Several of the bishops out here protesting in 2004 the visa denials that are coming from the central conferences, particularly Africa, and the stunning silence on visa denials, particularly from the ebony bishops, is problematic.
And that was 20 years ago you're talking about.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, Odell, keep us going. How about you help us into a segue towards the efforts to remove what's been called harmful language?
Yeah, I'm just surprised Joe had nothing to say about the bishops' meeting, but
I can. I
got you. All right, he's clergy. He's clergy.
Sure, I can. I tell you, I'm constantly kind of astonished at how tone deaf the bishops are. They just do not seem to really grasp the feeling of the people in the pews. I mean, think back, they constantly seem to get surprised by the reactions. I mean, they were surprised in 2019 when the traditional plan passed. They were surprised in 2022 when it was postponed 2 more years that people protested and the GMC started and WCA stuck around. They were surprised. They were shocked at the numbers of churches that disaffiliated. If you remember early on, several bishops are quoted saying, well, 1 or 2% of the churches may go, the extremes on the left and right, most folks will stay. 25% wound up leaving. I mean, it just seems like again and again, they're surprised by the responses of the people. And my concern is they're going to be surprised again. And maybe this feeds into something that was said last week, that there is a tendency at General Conference for the delegates to vote opposite to the way the bishops prefer, which ought to also have given them some indication that perhaps they're not in tune with the people in the rank and file, that they're kind of in a bubble somewhere. I'm very puzzled by it. And for Bickerton to use that kind of language just seems to just exacerbate the problem. So you got me going. Sorry, Odell.
No, he wanted it. You gave him what he wanted. Good for you. Odell's happy. We're all happy.
Um,
Go ahead,
I
Odell.
just, last thing on the bishops, I just couldn't help but notice that Black Methodist for Church Renewal and the New York Annual Conference had an open letter earlier this year or late last year charging racism in the New York Annual Conference. And so the tone deafness I hear, like I really, really do hear that. But let's move on to removing the language in the Book of Discipline. First, I want to bring up one petition that I thought was really, really good. However, I have to be honest with you, this petition is so late. It's petition number 20789. And it is actually in volume 3 of the ADCA. And it's to amend paragraph 161G. It says the United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality. And then it's going to add in adultery, fornication, lust, prostitution, sodomy, and all other manner of sexual immorality as referred in scripture and understood by the tradition of the church. I think that is very, very good language. However, I feel like that is 50 years too late. I think by not particularly putting in adultery and fornication into the Book of Discipline, that the LGBT really do feel like they've been singled out in the United Methodist Church. And so because they feel like they've been singled out in fornication, and let me state this, for those of you who attend churches that pastors have not addressed fornication or adultery from the pulpit, and I've heard this from American liberals in our delegation, you have gone to the wrong churches, because I'm telling you, as a person in the Black church, I've seen people who committed fornication, boyfriend got girlfriend pregnant, and boyfriend and girlfriend had to come to the front of the church to give an account. And then we had to vote whether they would remain in the church. I've also seen, I've been a part of a white evangelical church. I've also seen the pastor address adultery on 2 separate occasions in the church. And the men who committed the adultery, neither one of them showed up to confess their sins in front of the church. And they have not been back to that church since. And the pastor addressed it. He came down from the pulpit to address adultery. And I'm saying that because I'm hearing from American liberals that the church doesn't talk about adultery and fornication. Therefore, why should we talk about homosexuality? I'm here to tell American liberals that that's a lie. The church does address adultery and fornication from the pulpit. And just because it's not doing it in your church means that you have the wrong pastor. And for pastors who are saying that the church doesn't address adultery or fornication from the pulpit, you are the reason why the church is, because you're the pastor. And so if you're not preaching on adultery and fornication, that's not the church's problem, that's your problem. Adultery ruins relationships. We cannot have that in the church. Fornication, I've literally seen men run through women in the church. It has to be addressed. You cannot allow that to happen in your church. So I just want to address that, because I've heard too many liberals state incorrectly that the church is not addressing that, and that's a lie. I'm just calling it what it is. Now, the language is going to be changed. The votes are there. The language is going to be changed, and the LGBT feel like they have been singled out. And so removing the harmful language is going to happen. I asked if any other denominations had language about incompatibility with the teachings of Scripture. And I did go to the Human Rights Campaign website, and I only found one denomination that had that incompatibility language, and that is the American Baptist Churches. They adopted a statement in 1992. None of the other denominations have the incompatibility language. And the mainline Protestant denominations, with the exception of the American Baptist and the United Methodist Church, all have adopted some statements concerning same-sex marriage. That's the Episcopal Church, the United Church of Christ, the Presbyterian Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church, and the disciples of Christ. The American Baptists and the United Methodists are the only two holdouts, both holding on to that incompatibility language. But let me be clear, if you go into this human rights campaign statement, stance on faith position, there is not one Black denomination that endorses same-sex marriage. The African Methodist Episcopal Church, the Church of God in Christ, the National Baptist Convention, none of them endorse same-sex marriage. I want to make sure that when we go to vote, that you understand that there are Black churches in the United Methodist Church, and none of them, to my knowledge, in the United States are members of Reconciling Ministries Network. And there are several pastors who went to the Church of the Resurrection with Adam Hamilton and specifically stated they are not. Jasmine Smothers and Mike, I can't think of Mike's last name. He's at Strengthening Black Churches. When asked by Adam Hamilton in a panel discussion, they said they would not conduct same-sex marriages. I want to make sure that when we're voting for that, you consider all Americans, because we're not doing same-sex marriage. I know that there are some Black churches in the United Methodist Church who've done same-sex marriage. I know that, but we're not doing it. I just, the language will be removed. I got it. I understand it. But when you're talking about same-sex marriage, that's a different beast, and you're going to get pushback from the Black church.
Simon, any follow-up with Odell and his analysis?
I think I agree with him, and especially from this side of the world, those things are addressed even from the pulpit. So I'm surprised that there are those who feel that they are not being addressed. Maybe that's contextual, maybe wherever they are, either, like you said, is the pastor or something else. But from this end, those things are addressed from the pulpit. And in terms of the removal of the language, I think those are the things that Africans are fighting, that, we can't just remove it because we feel it is right, it needs to be there. That's how they're arguing. So it's a debate that will go on. But everything that is said, whether they have removed it, people will not accept same-sex marriages from the African point of view. That is not acceptable, never.
I was speaking with a centrist person in the United Methodist Church that I generally like, but I was saying that my number one fear for next week is that white liberals, knowing that they have the votes, are just going to force through everything that they can and alienate Black and brown people inside and outside of the United States, and that they'll just inherit the wreckage after that whenever Africans and African Americans will just refuse to be a part of what is left. And then all they had to say was, I disagree. But that's not an argument. I just, it seems almost inevitable that that's what's going to happen. And I guess the reason why I asked earlier if the Africans could speak with one voice is I think that is perhaps, to my mind, the most realistic way to avoid that. If they could just move things back and then reapportion the representation according to what the denomination actually is, then I think they could come back from the brink of what would otherwise be just a colossal train crash. Lonnie, I know that you see things similar to me in some ways, but also different. As I break that down, does it seem like I'm missing something, or do you agree with me that it really does look like a train crash is coming unless things are delayed for two years?
There's a potential train crash in most anything that we undertake that has as a broad set of implications as this does. But I think it's important to be clear that there are two ways to approach the language in the Book of Discipline that's considered, we sometimes refer to it as the harmful language and sometimes as the restrictive language, and both apply in some sense, although there are limitations in both ways. But one would be to remove the language that we're talking about as harmful, and then replacing that with something that would be more assertive on the side of inclusion. I know that for sure the 7 petitions that I submitted that I called a way forward for an fully inclusive church. I think that's what I named the package. But there are 7, and there are only 7. It's 7, but only 7 parts of the discipline that are subject to change using this principle of going forward in a fully inclusive manner. They are, and I think it's important to list them here since we're talking about it. They are paragraphs 161C and 161G, which are in the social principle. That's where the issue started 52 years ago, or however long that was. Then there's 304.3. There's 310.2.D, footnote 3. That's a fairly significant piece of this thing. There's 341.6. And there's 613.19. And then 2702.1. That last one is the part of the penalty code, the judicial trial requirement, the chargeable offense. And none of these petitions that I've submitted would replace this harmful language with more assertive language, which means that the Book of Discipline would be returned to its status prior to 1972, when the incompatibility language was added to the social principle. And that would mean that the church would return to the status where pastors decide whom to marry to whom, annual conferences decide who is eligible for ordination, bishops would decide what pastor is assigned to what post of service, and local churches would decide what services can be conducted in consultation with their pastors, what services can be conducted in their churches. So this would just, what I'm proposing would just be a return to the status quo the status quo before the war began. And I have one other perspective on this, which I think is important. When we talk about the language being harmful, the primary way that is interpreted, and rightfully so, I think, is that it's harmful to the people at whom it's directed primarily, which means the people who are members of the LGBTQ community. But in my judgment, when the church is not focused on justice for all, which implies, as Martin Luther King and others have said, in fact, you can go all the way back to the beginning of the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States, for example, liberty and justice for all. When we deny justice to anyone, the whole body suffers. And so I think that the language that's harmful to the members of the LGBTQ community is harmful to the whole church. And so I think that we're going to be addressing, by removing that language, the whole problem for the whole church, not just for the LGBTQ community.
I'm glad you got to explain how it is, the lens through which you see that, and I think everybody who's a part of this crew, well, really anybody who's just not a bigot, wants justice for all. I don't think there's anyone who stands against that. I think the root issue is actually just whether or not the actions associated with LGBTQIA identity are sinful and bad for them. and whether it's a loving thing to provide space for. And I don't imagine we're going to reach common ground on that. You're an intelligent person. We're all intelligent people here. But I think it is important as you guys frame the issue next week, that it's important not to mischaracterize the other side. And if someone's saying the other side just doesn't care about justice for all, that's just not true. It's just the calculus is done differently there. And so Godspeed to everybody who does that calculus next week. We've kind of exhausted our time, but Joe, I'm feeling like you are going to perfectly wrap up our time here, and then I'll say goodbye to the audience, and then we'll plan how we're gonna hopefully minister a little bit to those who've been along the ride with us next week. But Joe, what are some good closing thoughts to wrap all this up today?
I don't know how perfect this will be. I was going to just maybe respond a little bit to Lonnie about to really emphasize that the distinction has always been about practice, not persons in the Book of Discipline. And I think that distinction can also be applied in other areas. And what has occurred to me recently is there's some eerie echoes of the language that's been in the discipline about homosexual practice with the language that's being proposed for the social principles about polygamous relationships. If you recall, the language has been in the past anyway, we do not condone the practice of homosexuality, and then goes on to affirm the humanity of people and that we reject efforts to ostracize or that's not exactly the right language, reject people who reject folks. Well, if you look at the new language that's being proposed for the social principles, it starts by saying we cannot endorse the practice of polygamy, and then goes on to say, however, don't reject people, don't deny them the sacrament. It sounds eerily parallel to me. So that raises the question to me, does justice for all then mean we must also be willing to embrace polygamous marriage ceremonies? And is that does that language kind of signal the beginning of a process toward which we'll see polyamorous and polygamous things then endorsed at some point in the future? I just find that very interesting that there's echoes of the same language and how it's being phrased. So that was not to wrap up in general, but just make that point. In general, next week it starts. We're going to see what unfolds. I think it's going to be an interesting ride, and I do think there's going to be more surprises along the route for how people respond, and surprises to our leaders once more.
Well, I want to thank each of you gentlemen for bearing with me and one another. I just think this has been really good just selfishly, it's been good for me to get to know y'all better and see how your minds work. And I hope our audience has really benefited from you as well. If you haven't benefited from them, you're just not paying attention. So if you haven't already, go back and watch the previous episodes. It's been this high quality the whole time. We've done a really good job covering the spread of the main issues that are going to be before the conference next week. And then stay tuned for, if you haven't already subscribed to PlainSpoken, stay tuned. I'm going to hopefully give a lot of coverage to General Conference over the coming weeks. And I'm going to do my best to continue to utilize these voices in front of you so that we're all made richer for it. So God bless the United Methodist Church as it comes together. God bless the African delegates in particular who are going through such hardship and going to have to be on their game despite being on a bad, different diet and different sleep schedule. And God bless the bishops in particular as they check their tone and their privilege and hopefully usher the church through this hard time better than I've said, I'm afraid. So God bless you, audience. Be in prayer for the United Methodist Church, and we'll be seeing you again soon. Thanks, guys. See ya.